was difficult for Sparky. In fact, you could say it was darn near impossible. In the 8th grade, he failed every subject. In high school, he didn't just fail physics, he received a 0, distinguishing him as the worst physics student in his school's history. He also failed algebra, Latin, and English. And unfortunately, he wasn't much better in sports. Oh, he did manage to make the school's golf team, but he promptly lost the only really important match of the season. Now, there was a consolation round, of course, but he lost that one too. Sparky was also socially awkward, and he didn't really have any friends. It's not so much that he was disliked by his fellow students. It's more like no one really cared. No one really paid any attention that he was there. In fact, he was often surprised if a classmate even spoke to him outside of school. Now, there's no way to tell how he might have done in dating because in high school, Sparky never once asked a girl out for a date. He was simply too afraid of being turned down. To many folks, Sparky was just a loser. At least that's what everyone seemed to think. So he kind of learned to roll with it. Early in life, Sparky made up his mind that if things were meant to work out, they would. Otherwise, he would content himself with what appeared to be his inevitable mediocrity. There was, however, one thing that was important to Sparky: drawing. He loved to draw, and he was proud of his artwork. Unfortunately, like so much else in his life, no one else beside him seemed to appreciate his work. His senior year in high school, he actually submitted some of his cartoons to the editors of the school yearbook. They were turned down. Yet in spite of this particularly painful rejection, Sparky, convinced of his ability to draw, decided that he would become a professional artist. Following high school graduation, Sparky wrote a letter to Walt Disney Studios. They told him to send in some samples of his artwork, and then they suggested the subject matter for a cartoon that he should draw. He worked hard on that cartoon and on the other cartoons he submitted. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the reply came back. Once again, Sparky had been rejected. But, undaunted by these rejections, Sparky decided to write his own autobiography in cartoons. And in it, he described his childhood self, a chronic underachiever who many deemed a hopeless loser. To the surprise of almost everyone, that cartoon autobiography would become a worldwide success. You see, Sparky, the boy who failed every subject in the 8th grade and whose work was rejected again and again and again, was none other than Charles Schulz, the creator of the Peanuts comic strip, and the lovable loser, Charlie Brown, the kid whose kite would never fly and who never did get to kick that football. I think there's something heartwarming about stories where the underdog wins. There's something that appeals to the good in all of us, and we want to root for them and cheer them on. There's something that resonates with the American dream we celebrate this weekend, something that sprouts from our Christian roots. It's little wonder then that we're so enchanted with the story of the young shepherd boy David who goes out to face the mighty giant Goliath while all of Israel shake in their boots. You see, the Israelites are in their promised land, but they're far from secure. In today's text, they find themselves under threat of attack by the dreaded Philistines. Mercenaries, really, who've already wreaked havoc from Syria to Egypt. On one side of Israel, to the east, lies a mountain range. To the west, the coastal plains. King Saul and his army are encamped in that valley between the mountains. The Philistines come and camp on the western ridge. So the Israelites move up and camp on the eastern ridge. And all that separates them is this wide valley of Elah. And they're at a standstill, stuck really, each side waiting for the other to make the first move. Now, as I understand it, in an effort to minimize casualties, it was often the practice of the day for opposing armies to send out their mightiest warrior for a kind of one-on-one combat, winner take all. In this story, the Philistines have chosen their man Goliath, the furious warrior man among them. Goliath was the largest and the strongest, a giant really, the Bible said, over 9 feet tall, who was experienced in warfare and prepared both for hand-to-hand combat with a sword or long-distance battle with one of his many spears. To top it all off, he was covered from shoulder to toe in bronze armor. He was quite the imposing figure, as you can imagine, and his reputation had preceded him. No wonder Saul couldn't find a single man willing to go out there and take him on. Except, that is, the silly shepherd boy named David. So up against this alpha male monstrosity of a man, we have David, called a boy by both his own king and the enemy. David has zero experience in war. He could hardly move when wearing Saul's armor, and he's never been trained in the use of a sword or a spear. So he decides to go out and face the mighty giant with nothing more than his shepherd's staff, his sling, and 5 stones he's chosen from the nearby stream. It's no surprise then that Goliath should taunt him and fail to take him seriously. But then, in some ways, that was David's advantage. He refused to fight Goliath on his terms. David would do it his way, God's way. So while the giant lumbered forward in his impressive but cumbersome gear, David loaded his sling with a single stone. He wound it up, and wound it up, and wound it up, and then he let it fly, striking the giant in the most vulnerable spot of all, right between the eyes, knocking him down and knocking him out. And then, while he's down, he takes Goliath's sword, cuts off the giant's head, and sends the Philistines back. In David, the nation of Israel sees a reflection of itself. The small, the powerless, the dispossessed, the losers, if you will, standing up against the giants, the powerful, the winners of the world. It's a story we know all too well. Most of us have loved this story from our childhood. The story of little David triumphing over great big giant Goliath. It's a story loved and nurtured by the weak who go up against the strong. The lone man standing against the great tanks in Tiananmen Square in Beijing. Our 13-year-old Malayla, who faces down the Taliban as she continues to push for the right for education for girls in her home country. It's the kid who confronts the bully on the playground. It's those of you who face down bigotry and ignorance in your own family or amongst your friends as you claim your right to love the one you love. In today's scripture, David is often portrayed as small, weak, and poorly armed. But what if that's not totally accurate? What if David is actually better equipped than we've always thought? Did you know that some scholars believe that David actually had the upper hand that day? That he was not the underdog we've always thought him to be? I read somewhere recently that the sling David used was not like the slingshot that's on the front of your bulletin. It was actually a leather pouch with 2 cords extending from each end. And what would happen is you would put a rock, a stone, and these were very heavy stones, denser than the average stone. You would put them in the sling, and then you would wind it up and let go of one of the cords, and then that rock would become a projectile that is as fast and as accurate as a modern-day Major League fastball. This was not the battle, folks, that Goliath was prepared to fight. It's not the battle he was expecting that day. In all of his cumbersome armor and weaponry, instead of being an advantage, turned out in actuality to be a liability, and thus his downfall. You know, at some point, life is a way of belittling us all, even those we consider to be the greatest among us. Bishop Desmond Tutu is a hero of mine, and he's not a very tall man. He spoke at my seminary graduation, then I had the opportunity to speak at Southwestern in Georgetown. And really, he's a tiny man by the world standards. But spiritually speaking, Desmond Tutu, Bishop Tutu, is a giant. One day, Bishop Tutu was walking by a construction site, and he was on one of those, temporary sidewalks they build that has only enough width for one person to pass. A white man appeared at the other end of the tunnel, the construction tunnel, and recognizing Bishop Tutu said, "I don't give way to gorillas." At which Bishop Tutu stepped aside, made a deep, sweeping gesture, and said, "Ah, yes, but I do." Bishop Tutu has, for many years, been the voice of those who are hopeless, powerless, voiceless, down and out. And his hope comes from the same place our hope comes. His hope, our hope, comes from our faith in God and from stories like this one, the story of David and Goliath. Hope in a God who takes sides with the oppressed, the powerless, the forgotten, the dispossessed. In today's story, David's situation seemed impossible. Yet this wonderfully impudent little lad wants to know, who is this jerk who thinks he can stand there and taunt the armies of the Lord? And in his word and in his courage in the face of the seemingly impossible, every little child who has been the victim of the playground bully, every child who has been embarrassed by an uncaring teacher before the laughter of the whole class, every worker who's been taunted by the boss, everyone who knows what it's like to be treated and labeled as a loser, perks up and takes notice. David doesn't know all there may be to know about God, but he does know one thing, that his God is a God of deliverance. The Lord has delivered David from the lion's jaw, and the Lord will also deliver David and his fellow Israelites from the hands of the feared Philistines. Word, sing, the stone flies and wonder of wonders, Goliath lies dead. Israel's delivered, David is saved. And it begs the question, whose sins are now? I know that in many ways, this story is a childlike fairy tale. especially for those of us who are all grown up, sophisticated, and wise in the ways of the world. No matter how grown up or sophisticated we may be, no matter how in control of things we may think we are, we also know that life does take its unexpected turns. That life is not always the way we want it to be. Life is not always played by the rules we put by. We all have our Goliaths in our lives. Giants that scare us, intimidate us, and sometimes shake us to our very core. Max Lucado, in his book, Facing Our Giants, says that giants are real. That they're not some figment of our imagination, something we just dream of. That they are the problems, the pain, and the persecutions we will all have to face from time to time in our lives. And oftentimes, they cause major difficulties for us. For some of us, giants are things like resentment, or fear, insecurity, loneliness, worry, bitterness, pride, an unwillingness to forgive. For others, it may be depression, hopelessness, discouragement, self-doubt, addiction, or abuse. Sometimes our giants come from within, and sometimes they're the results of the actions of others. Sometimes they result from prejudice and discrimination that deny us the opportunities that others so freely have. Sometimes they're the result of hateful and hurtful words, words that wound, words that cause estrangement. Giants come in many forms, and for each one of us they're different. For all of us, the message is we do not have to be afraid. Not with God on our side. Not when God has given us the tools we need to defeat those giants. King David, as we will learn in the weeks to come, had his share of human weaknesses. But in God lay his strength. As we come today to the Lord's table, it is my prayer that we may find here in these simple gifts of bread and wine the courage and the strength and the tools to face all the giants in our lives. Reminded by this simple gift of bread and cup that we do not face them alone. Instead, God is with us, equipping us, giving us the strength and the courage to overcome those giants and the grace we need to recognize them. Or as God reminds us in Psalm 46, a psalm that is likely written by King David, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear though the earth should change, though the mountains shake in the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble. The Lord of hosts is with us, the God of Jacob